Today, I'm going to walk through all of the plugins that I use on a regular basis. Like, as somebody who is working as a producer full-time, these are the plugins that I am constantly reaching for every single day. Now, before we jump into this, I'm just going to say straight up, none of these plugins are sponsored, and I would actually advise against you guys just adding all these plugins to the cart and buying all of them, because you should not do that. But I figured it might be helpful to show some of the tools that I'm using, also explain why I'm using them. Because even though I'm using these specific plugins in my process, chances are you have something either in your stock default DAW plugins or in your general plugin library that will work pretty much the same. Also, I've sprinkled in a lot of these plugins that are just straight up free, and they're free ones that I actually use quite often. So be sure to watch through the whole video. And let's start out with my favorite, which is the stock Ableton plugins. And for people who may not know, there's actually a benefit to using as many stock plugins as possible, at least in Ableton. Because here in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, when I hover over a plugin, it actually shows you how many samples of latency it adds. And all of the Ableton plugins add 0 samples of latency because you have the plugin being developed by the same company who is making the DAW. So they tend to integrate with each other pretty easily. So yeah, there's definitely an advantage to using stock plugins as often as possible. And the stock Ableton EQ is just kind of really practical. It has enough bands to where you can do all of the general shaping that you need. If you hit this arrow, it'll blow up to the entire size of the screen. And depending on what keyboard shortcuts you're holding, it will adjust the Q or the speed at which you're adjusting stuff. I have a default preset set up with a high pass and a low pass just kind of ready to go. So when I add this, I can kind of just very quickly grab stuff and move points around to get the exact tone I want. And it ends up being a lot faster and more economical from a DAW standpoint than using something like a really fancy EQ. Same with the stock Ableton compressor. Pretty much every feature you can think of that you would want from a compressor is present here. And on some level, it's a lot easier to do things like sidechaining because it's just built in right here to the front face of the plugin. So you can be very economical with how many mouse clicks it takes for you to actually get the sound result you're looking for. Like if I want to sidechain this compressor to a kick drum and bring down the threshold and the attack, it's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like it's very fast. Normally I'll use the auto filter for similar things, but it's more of like a sound design thing where if I want to add an envelope to something and I don't really want to dive into the menus too hard on a plugin, I'll just use this. Also, if I need to automate a high pass filter down for like a certain section, make everything in the mix feel like it's underwater, I'll normally use this or the EQ8, honestly, because with this high pass filter and low pass filter here by default, I can kind of automate the both of them pretty easily. Erosion is really awesome. It's a way to sort of add sound design texture to something. Picked this one up from Mr. Bill, as well as the vocoder, because you can get some really cool like broadband EQ stuff. It's actually really practical when you use it this way. And then finally, utility. It's really practical because you can flip the polarity of the left and the right. You just throw it on a track and hit this mono button, and now the source is mono. Or you can just make the bass mono and select what the crossover frequency is. You can actually automate the gain knob instead of using the main fader over here for automation. So yeah, all of these plugins are super practical. So now let's dive into virtual instruments. Sublab by Future Audio Workstations. This is like my go-to plugin for like 808s or anything like that because it's very practical, and a lot of the sound design elements that you need for an 808, like a compressor or distortion with filters. Also, you can blend in a synth, an individual kick sample, and this sort of subby low end layer that you dial in. And with pretty much all of the parameters, you can adjust how much that effect is affecting each individual source. Also, this 808 NASCAR patch. It's like my favorite patch ever. Surprise to nobody, the next one is Arcade's Output, which I need to update. But I find that Arcade Output is really great for adding those little bits of ear candy on top of a track after a majority of the meat is done. And I know a lot of people who will start with an arcade element just to add a little bit of variety to their sound because there's so many different lines that they have and they're constantly adding new stuff. So it's really easy to get inspired and say, you know what, I want to make something super cyberpunky. So I'm going to go to In a World and just start grabbing stuff. and boom, now you have an inspiration point to start making something very cyberpunky and industrial. Next is Contact, and Contact kind of doesn't count as like one instrument to me. It counts as like multiple different libraries, but you can see I'm a big fan of a lot of the lines, like the 40s very own keys, some of the synthier elements. Their actual new library that they just updated is really good, and there's a lot of practical sounds in that. There's also some Get Good Drum stuff, some mixed wave stuff, session horns, the pianos. There's just a lot of really good stuff in here, so if you want to see exactly what I'm using, just look through here and take some notes. Next one is Anna 2, which I am absolutely in love with. This is one of my favorite synthesizers. Honestly, this has taken over my setup almost in the same way that Serum takes over other people's setups, because in my opinion, the patches that come with Anna 2 are just way more practical than a lot of the stuff that you find in Serum. Serum is a great synth, by the way. I absolutely love Serum, but for me, using the presets that come with this, like, you can very easily be like, I want a soft synthwave pad, and boom, you have like a dozen different options that are really inspiring. Also, they are updating their packs all the time. If there's any one synth that I would recommend people get, it would be this one. The next plugin that is one of my favorites is the Tal Uno LX, which is made to be a replica of a Juno. Something I really love is there's actually a lot of free presets on the Tal website. This plugin is great value. It's like $60 for the full version, and there's also a free version of it. But the one downside of this plugin is that the presets that come stock with it are not that practical for modern use. But if you go through on a bit of searching and you get some of the alternative presets on the Tal website, or my personal recommendation would be the Reverb Machine Juno Jazz presets, you can get a lot of really practical sort of 80s Juno stuff. I just love it. Every time I go through and I find a patch like that, I want to write a song. Next is the Arturia 5 collection, which is just a collection of a lot of different types of vintage synthesizers that also include the Juno, but there's also stuff like Mellotrons, Moogs, Prophets, vintage samplers from the 80s. There's just a lot of really cool stuff in here. And I like the Arturia pack just because, in my experience, out of all of the sort of vintage synth packs that you can buy, the Arturia has the most practical stuff, to the point where if you get the Arturia pack, I think that you're pretty well covered for any like indie pop needs that you might have. Because when you get one pack that has a Moog, a Jupiter, a Juno, a DX7, an Emu, all the way to like a Buchla synth, you're pretty well covered. Also, their interface for going through presets is actually very awesome. So when you're using the Analog Labs plugin, it's sorting through all of them, like all of the different synthesizers in the collection. But if you want to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you're editing the sound, you can also just grab that individual synth. Next one I have is a very recent addition, which is the UVI Workstation. I've been messing around a lot with the V-Horns pack. I just bought the bundle for all saxophones, and they've basically become my go-to saxophone samples. Very fun to play with. Also, with this plugin, it's possible to route multiple MIDI channels into multiple MIDI inputs on this one plugin and have them route out of multiple audio outs. So it's actually possible to have 4 different saxophones playing 4 different parts and coming out of 4 different tracks with their own panning, mixing, and all other settings, just using this one plugin, which I love. Next one is one that I'm not using as often anymore, but I started using Superior Drummer 2.0 a long time ago. And honestly, a lot of like the Easy X's that were made for Easy Drummer, you can still open them in Superior Drummer 2.0. And they're actually pretty practical. Like, that's a pretty cool snare drum. I'm probably going to update to Superior Drummer 3.0 this year, just because there's some cool functionality. Also, their default kit in Superior Drummer 3 feels like it's a lot more usable than the Avatar kit in here, which I don't think I even have installed. But I still love using this because it's a very easy to use plugin, and it's really easy to route out an individual channel to its own send and route that in Ableton as its own audio track, which I also do in Steven Slate drums. Because the one downside that I have with all of the drum kits that I have in Kontakt is that doing this kind of routing is super tedious. Like, you need to create an instance of Kontakt that has multiple stereo outs before you add the drum kit in, because if you get to the mixing stage and you haven't done that, you need to like save the kit as a preset, delete it, open it back up again, then reroute everything. It's just kind of a headache. Now we are going to guitar amp sims, and to nobody's surprise, we are using Guitar Rig 6 from Native Instruments. I use this plugin all the time on almost every mix, just because I feel like the tones that they have here on the presets are very practical to use, and they range a pretty decent amount. Like, this creamy snowflakes texture is one of my go-to sounds for like making ambient sounding stuff. And for somebody who's like a producer and a songwriter, being able to have like a preset like this that just comes in the box where I can just pull it up real quickly and start creating instantly and then tweak it a little bit later, I love that more than anything. But even if I'm not using any of the presets, building a tone from scratch with this is honestly my preferred plugin in terms of like guitar shaping stuff, just because everything that you need to build out a solid patch is just kind of right here. And there's a lot of unique tools for like doing different kinds of amp splits or blending controls. So pretty much everything that I need for an amp sim is in this plugin. But of course, that doesn't stop me from having more than just one. So I am a big fan of the neural DSP stuff. Right now, I have Archetype Corey Wong and Gojira and Parallax. I do want to check out Rabia and Nolly, so I don't think that I'm done with them yet. But these plugins are very high fidelity. Again, I'm a sucker for any amp sim that has really usable presets. And even though Corey Wong is like a funk guitar player, they do have a variety of musicians in here that are making presets for this plugin. So like the Rabia's Strat Neck Grunt preset is actually really awesome as like a rock preset. And the flexibility that you get with these different amp sims and being able to mix match different cabs and amp heads, I don't know, I just really like it, and I use them quite often. Now, one company that I think is kind of underrated in the guitar amp sim world is Plugin Alliance, because the Brainworks stuff that they have in their monthly bundle is legitimately amazing. Like all of the Ampeg bass stuff, I'm a huge fan of this Pete Thorne signature amp from Sir, and it's just these guys know how to emulate a guitar amp in a very natural way. Like, these are kind of like my favorite like individual amps to play through when I'm just jamming on something. And all of them have their own like effects rack, so you can high pass and low pass them with noise gate and different IRs that you can pick. But yeah, Plugin Alliance, very underrated. And now going to plugins that I'm using on a regular basis for vocal editing, or I should say I was using on a regular basis, because this year I have started outsourcing my vocal editing to someone else. Clay Agnew, thank you so much for making all of the stuff that I send you sound amazing. But yeah, when I was editing every single vocal track by myself, I was using Melodyne. My preferred way of vocal editing is to start out with a graph tuner like this and get it sounding as good as possible, and then running it into some kind of regular tuner and just have it lightly correcting it just to sort of even it out a tiny bit. Almost the way that you would use an 1176 to even out the really big dynamic changes in a vocal, and then use something like an LA2A to sort of generally round it out. But yeah, these two were like my favorites. I did use Auto-Tune for a decent amount, and I still think that they are great, but I was using Auto-Tune Artist and I really couldn't justify other subscriptions just to get Auto-Tune Pro. I still use Auto-Tune Artist quite a bit though. For instruments and bass instruments, it's awesome because you can level out any inconsistencies with a bass that's slightly out of tune, or if you have like a guitar solo that you need to bring in a little bit. The plugin that sort of changed my life was like Vocaline. So for anyone who doesn't know, what you do is you take Vocaline, you put it on a track, and you set your guide track, which is normally your main vocal, and your dub track, which is normally like your doubles, your harmonies, and stuff like that. And this plugin will automatically sort of shift your background vocals to be perfectly in time with your main vocal, which saves you a bunch of time, because in order to get that really thick pop vocal sound, you normally have to do it by hand. It's like 10 times as tedious as drum editing. So this plugin makes it insanely fast, especially when you're using it how I used to use it, which is inside of Reaper, because this supports ARA2, which is audio random access. So you don't even need to necessarily hit capture and play through the timeline in order to capture your vocal. You can literally just in Reaper select the region you want to time align and then hit the capture button, and it will just automatically scan it in, which is awesome because you can do that across multiple tracks at once. So time aligning just one section of a song can be done in like a couple of minutes as opposed to a few hours, which is what it would take before that. Now let's talk a little bit about the plugins that I use every day for things like sound design, which are like the interesting effects to make things sound unique, give a little bit of character to them. One of my favorites is honestly the kilohertz bundle that comes with Slate All Access, because the library of plugins that they have in that bundle is enormous. So if you want to grab a phaser or a bit crusher or something super unique like a Haas effect, they are just these little tiny simple plugins that are really easy to add onto a track really quickly and bounce down. So yeah, I'm reaching for these guys pretty often. Next ones I'm using are the FX collection from Arturia, which I should say was given to me by Arturia for free, so it was not sponsored in any way. Actually, they were offering to send something physical to me, and instead I asked if they could give me a license for this, because a lot of the effects that they have in their effects collection are like really unique things like guitar pedals, or this, which is the chorus section of a Juno, which is probably my favorite Juno style chorus. I only use the towel one when I'm just grabbing stuff in the moment, because for so long I didn't have this one. And one of the newest ones that I've gotten, which is just stupid fun for sound design sessions, is Tornado from Sugar Bites. So these are all different effects that are very weird and very unique in how they texture stuff, and they're mapped to a single knob, and you can go in and edit the individual preset. But this is a plugin that is made for live performance stuff, so it's really easy to just sort of hit this dice knob, have it throw in a bunch of random controls, and then these knobs are actually mapped to my MPC that I have sitting on the desk next to me. So it's really easy to play a loop and just start turning knobs and stuff and come up with something really unique that's really interesting. I don't know. I'm in love with it, honestly. And since it was made to be used in a live performance setting, CPU usage is super low. Now going into reverbs and delays. Honestly, I really love using the Waves H delay. It is one of the most practical delays that I use. Pretty much every setting you would need as like an essential for a delay is here. And I don't know, I've just become really comfortable with this one specifically. So this guy is on pretty much every send that I use. Going back to Arturia, I'm using their Rev Plate 140 a lot. This is not a clean plate reverb at all. I have some other plugins that I would use if I was going for something like that, but this is like a vintage style plate reverb that is really dirty, really messy, and the modes on this thing are very practical. I don't know, this is what I grab when I need a reverb that has like a lot of attitude, and I'm looking for something that has a little bit more of a character to it than a really clean reverb, which is the same reason I use the Tape 201, which is like a space echo. Like you have the normal settings like ping pong and mid side, but you also just have a bunch of weird tape head settings, and it sort of blurs the line between a tape echo and a reverb, and you can like drive the input and get it to distort a lot. Like these guys are not made to get clean modern delay or reverb sound. These are made to get like the really disgusting sound. Now, if I want that modern reverb sound, there are some options that I go for. I actually really like the Verb Suite stuff from Slate and Liquid Sonics. Like their different reverb types are just insane, and you can get pretty much anything you want from these guys. Like their non-linear reverb stuff is really fun. And I have recently gotten into the Valhalla train, so I have Valhalla Vintage Verb and Delay. Honestly, I'm still kind of experimenting with these guys. I'm not as experienced with them as I am with like the other plugins that I've used for a long time. But so far in my time with them, I can totally see why these are like the go-tos for a lot of people. The second I found out that the Delay has its own like self-ducking feature and the different kinds of styles and eras that you can add to it, I was like, okay, I get it. There's a lot of cool stuff here. All right, now we're getting into the mixing plugins that I'm using almost every day. First up is Softtube's saturation knob, which is free. And it's really awesome because you can actually select the different different kinds of saturation, emphasis you want. And once you've set it how you like it, you can hit this set knob and it will auto adjust the gain out. I do like the Slate All Access bundle, and I am using a lot of their plugins pretty often. Like the virtual mix rack, I feel like is really practical for a lot of channel strip style needs. And you can actually get pretty far with a mixing chain if you just use this. Another bundle that I love is the Plugin Alliance bundle, which has a giant amount of plugins from a bunch of different manufacturers. It's all really high fidelity stuff, and regardless of what you need, there's probably a plugin for it somewhere in there. Like, until I was making this video, I didn't even realize that they had like a subharmonic plugin from Brainworks, which is awesome. I'll probably try using that. The Brainworks EQ stuff is probably what I'm reaching for most often. I just really love the way that it works in a mixing setting, especially with these presence and bass shift knobs. I also just recently got into FabFilter, which are all really awesome plugins. You can use them for like mastering stuff because they're really high fidelity, or you can use them on lower fidelity settings and they work perfectly fine in a mix setting. Like the ability to just go through, listen to something, and then maybe make it dynamic. I would say it's the most intuitive plugin in terms of EQ. Also a big fan of Saturn. It's like the only saturation plugin you would ever really need, since you're able to divide things into different bands and change the settings for different bands. It's a lot easier to sort of make this really hyper specific distortion sound that reacts the way you want it to, and then just bring down the mix and get it at the perfect point. I do use Soothe quite often because for a lot of people, it's a lot easier to throw Soothe on something and just sort of focus in on the range that you want than to go through the process of doing surgical EQ for a lot of stuff. There's a lot of options like Delta, so you can hear exactly what you're compressing, mix functions, different depths, and they have a lot of really useful presets from pretty high level people. Like in the mastering section, they have some stuff from Josh Goodwin. No relation, by the way. It's just great for that little extra layer of cleanup. The next free plugin we have is Wider by Polyverse and Infected Mushroom. This is like the only stereo widening plugin that I will use. You can actually go beyond 100% and really destroy stuff. But in terms of just like general, like you want to get a little bit more width out of something, this is like the cleanest stereo widening plugin that I've used. We also have Track Spacer, which has been on this channel a lot. It's really great for dynamically pulling down certain frequency ranges of elements based off of a sidechain coming from a different source. So I'm normally throwing this on my instrument bus and sidechaining that to the vocal just so I can subtract this sort of general range out of the instruments and let the vocals come up without compressing the entire mix. I love Transient Master. It is the most simple transient shaper plugin that I have. I do like the SPL transient shaper. It's a little bit more in depth, but if I want something simple, this thing is great. Sustain and attack and gain. In my opinion, that's really all you need from a transient shaper. Another free plugin, this is called Bark of Dog by Bose Labs. This is one that my friend Johnny showed me too. It is a subharmonic exciter plugin that's based off of the Voice of God real life rack unit. And yeah, it's free and it's very practical. You just kind of find the subharmonic frequency that you want to excite. You can boost it. There's several different modes. There's a mix knob. Like there's kind of nothing more you could ask for. And now I'm going to show you guys the reference plugins that I'm using to double check the material that I'm making. Honestly, in the mixing phase, I am using tonal balance control a decent amount. You can sort of swap through different genres and see the general EQ range of the mix that you're doing, as well as your crest factor, which is really important. And yeah, I'll normally throw this on in the mixing stage because I normally mix into a limiter just to get that sound, and then I turn the limiter off before I send it to mastering. And doing that with this, I normally get pretty accurate results, especially if I create a profile from a FLAC file. So what I'll normally do is I'll go on a place like Tidal and find an album that's a reference, because I actually subscribe to the Tidal master level. So these are 44.1 kilohertz, 24-bit FLAC files most of the time. And I'll just kind of record them in, and then you can load that in as a target and it will create its own curve based off of that song. So if you have a reference track that you are trying to base your mix off of, it's very useful and very practical. WLM from Waves, because this thing, again, it's just like a comfort plugin. I've used this for so many years, and when I just need something simple that shows me LUFS and peak values, this is just what I reach for. I've also been using Sound ID Reference for a long time, been very happy with their products. I mainly use their headphone plugin, so essentially you can just load in profile that is a specific set of headphones that you own, and then you can tell it to simulate different listening scenarios. scenarios. So I have some AKGs, some Audio-Technica M20s, some Sennheiser HD65s, and you can just listen to stuff on your headphones and it will even out the EQ inconsistencies in your headphones. So yeah, I used this for a long time and I'm really happy with it. And then recently, this guy has become a new staple. I decided to jump on the Slate VSX train, which I've been really happy with, by the way. So essentially you can put this plugin on your master output, and then with the headphones that come with it, you can simulate different listening environments. So these are the main ones that I'm using right now. I bought the Platinum bundle, by the way. And there's also just a bunch of different rooms you can choose from. And honestly, this is kind of really helpful for me because even though it takes a while to get used to when you first try it, the benefits of using something like this to reference your work is that honestly, you can make music without speakers, which from a living situation standpoint is kind of awesome for me. Like I'm in the process of organizing a move right now. And so I know that on some level, I don't need to find a space that has a massive amount of room so that I can set up my Neumanns in the correct way, because I can just use this plugin to simulate those listening environments. So this plugin has the potential to save me like $200 to $300 a month because I don't need to find a bigger place to build my studio out. Always a big plus. And I had to make this own section for Waves plugins because there are just so many plugins that I use from Waves that are just kind of like part of my workflow. One of them is a bass rider. I really like this for leveling out a bass performance without necessarily compressing it more. Our bass is a great way to add fundamental frequencies to a low-end sound source. So you just kind of look up what key your song is in, and you can add either a first or a third harmonic. Max Bass is a great sort of sub-harmonic exciter that can let you extend that lower end range in a very clean way. CLA bass is a great source for tone shaping. Like you can get pretty close to a polished bass sound just using this plugin. C6 is my favorite multi-band compressor just because I've been using it since I was producing 10 years ago. It's just kind of like a comfort plugin for me now. So is DS, which is the first de-esser that I ever bought. Not a whole lot of settings, but yeah, it's everything that you need in a de-esser. Surprise to nobody, Kramer Tape ended up on this list. This is like my favorite saturation plugin because you can really destroy a sound with it. L1 is also one of those plugins where I've just been using it for so long, it would be weird if I stopped using it. Like I honestly swapped over to the legacy look just because I'm so used to this look. MV2 is an upwards compressor, so instead of actually taming the peaks of a sound, this will actually raise up the valleys a little bit more, which can be really cool if you want to add that sort of oomph to a sound that compression normally adds, but you don't really want to affect the peaks at all. One knob pumper has saved my life so many times. I literally bought the one knob bundle just because I needed this plugin. It's just a simple sidechain effect, and it is a single knob, and it has pretty much all of the settings that I would ever want in a sidechain plugin. I use RVox and RComp all the time. They're just like my go-to, like really aggressive compressors. Like they're really great for adding that little bit of harshness compression-wise to the end of a sound source. So like I'm adding this on the end of every vocal chain that I'm doing. Shep's Omnichannel is my go-to channel strip plugin. If there was only one channel strip plugin that I could use for the rest of my life, it would be this one. Because everything from a sound design standpoint and just a mixing functionality standpoint, this is everything that you need to get something sounding really amazing. Like if you're not that experienced with getting a good mix, I would recommend getting this plugin and just seeing how close to a final sound you can get just using this. And the last plugin category we're going to talk about are mastering. So again, with FabFilter stuff, I'm still pretty fresh to it, but even just a little bit that I've been using Pro L2, again, I see why people like it so much. It is just one of the cleanest mastering limiters that I've ever used, and it's very practical. If I say something is very practical, it's because that's a value thing for me. I don't like plugins that are overly complicated. But yeah, I'm normally using the all-around mode or the transparent mode. Yeah, there's kind of nothing in this that I wouldn't need from a mastering limiter. And then we have SIR standard clip. This is like the only clipper that I use. I found this plugin from Nicholas Roberto Di Lorenzo's mastering class from Panorama Mixing and Mastering. This is like a really great way to just sort of clip off the tops of those transients and then boost the volume back up a little bit so you can get a bit of a louder sound on the master on the tail end. Also, it's only like 60 bucks. Another free plugin that I love is the Kotelnikov mastering compressor from Tokyo Dawn Labs. This is like one of the most versatile compressors I have for mastering stuff. It's really easy to get the sound that you need. You have separate releases for peaks and RMS. You have a high pass filter. You have a delta knob so that you can hear exactly what you are compressing. Like literally every feature that you would need in a mastering compressor is just here. So if you don't need something that has too much character to it, this thing is like money. Another plugin that I stole from Nick's class is the black box from Brainworks. Nick, I'm sorry, but if you don't want me to steal all of your plugin selections from your mastering chain, then maybe don't make such an awesome mastering class. But yeah, the low setting for this guy is really great for just sort of bringing up the body of a master. And then the air knob is actually very clean and very bright. And then the last plugin bundle that I use all the time is Ozone. Even though I master stuff often, the Ozone stuff is really cool. I'm thinking of making like a how to master your own stuff mini course just using the Ozone stuff. Because if you get Ozone 10, or honestly, I'm using Ozone 9, those are like all of the tools that you would need to get like a really nice sounding master. I have my own preferences for plugins beyond that, but honestly, you can get a really nice sounding master just using Ozone. But yeah, those are all the plugins that I use. Sorry for this being such a long video, but yeah, there was a lot. If you guys have any other plugins that you would like my take on, I can't guarantee that I've used them, but put them down in the comments below. Or if you have any other suggestions for things that I can replace, I would love to hear some suggestions, because I'm one of those people who only updates their plugin lists like once every 3 years. So it is not out of the question that there's just a revolutionary new plugin that's out that I've just never heard of. But yeah, we will be back to the regular style videos next week. I will see you guys then. And yeah, please, whatever you do, do not buy all of these guys because you will be in debt.